Hi everybody, I am Nail and welcome to Simply Nail's Tiny Studio. I'm so glad that you could join me and I'm so glad that you could return to the Tiny Studio to see what I'm up to. I'm up to a lot. What are you up to over in your Tiny Studios? Well, what are we going to do today? What am I doing in the Tiny Studio today? Well, I'm doing a few things. I'm fooling around with some jewelry designs and I am crafting some, working on some projects, of course, here in the Tiny Studio, some crochet projects. But I wanted to hop on here to show you some of the wonkier things that happens to me here in the Tiny Studio as far as crochet is concerned. Now, I want to be the first person to say, and my daughter agrees with this. When I started crocheting again, I turned on YouTube, and it was about maybe 5 years ago now. I turned on YouTube and I started looking at some videos. However, before, my daughter advised me to look at YouTube to get a little encouragement and get some help. I was going on the recesses of my mind when it came to crocheting. So I was making so many crazy mistakes. It was not funny. My first, very first blanket that I made, and see, that's another thing about me. When I start something, I usually jump in the deep end and then work my way back. I don't know why I do that. I don't know. Maybe my mother is correct. I'm just hard-headed. Maybe I should have done a little research first, looked at some videos maybe, and some of the mistakes that I made along the way could have been prevented. However, there were some things that happened on that journey that really turned out to be interesting because there were so many different things that I was doing, not knowing, as my daughter said. My daughter was like, "Mom, how do you do this? You hop into something you did not understand do not understand what you're doing, but you in essence created something really cool." I don't know, but that's what happened to me. I just did it. And I really think it has to do with artistry, being an artist. You, and a designer, you just create, right? You just create. So when I started crocheting again about 5 years ago, I hadn't really picked up a crochet hook probably in about 18, 19 years. And I started crocheting when I was about 9 or 10 years old. My grandmother taught me. And so throughout the years, I would pick up my crochet hook and create, maybe a coaster or something here and there. But it was never anything major. It was only to about 5 years ago where I really just, started doing, things, trying to create, be more efficient and consistent with my crochet. But anyhow, I started making afghans right off the bat, some serious afghans. And when I got back around to the basics, which for me, making a granny square, to me, that is a basic knowledge that you should have as a crocheter. By the time I got back to that end of the pool, by the time I got back there, I had already, completed maybe about 4 or 5 different afghans with 11 different stitches. I had already started my business, and I already had customers, and I had created, baby afghans, baby blankets, scarves, hats, all of those things. I then get right on back to foundational crochet, and for me, foundational crochet is the granny square. I get down to that, and because of my hard-headedness, I'm not really paying attention as to how to really create a good granny square or a good granny square afghan. So I make what? Some bloopers, some serious bloopers too. Now I showed you some of the granny squares that I had some, that I call irregular granny squares. But I also have a couple of granny square blankets or lap blankets that I'm going to share with you that I stopped working on for the simple fact that there were some mistakes. Some mistakes that turned my granny blanket into a wonky granny square blanket. And I have one to show you. I have two to show you today. So here's the first one. This is my first granny square afghan that I would like to show you today. And here is the granny square afghan. And see if you can tell me where I went wrong. Are you ready? Let's get started. I'm holding it up so you can see. Okay, now, can you see where I went wrong? Did you notice the wonkiness of it? Now, where did I go wrong on this afghan? Well, as you can see, the square is not really the square. It kind of looks like an old TV screen. That's what it looks like. It looks like an old TV. It looks like, the way TVs used to look back in the 70s. That's how this looks. It's really interesting. I'm going to put it on my recliner back here. I'm going to use it. I'm not going to throw it out, and I'm definitely not going to frog it. And the reason why is because guess what? We all make mistakes. We all, especially getting started, and this is just to say, don't get discouraged. If you are just starting in the world of crochet, if you're just getting started and you make mistakes or what have you, don't give up. I didn't give up. I wanted to, but I didn't give up. I kept going, and that determination and consistency and that hunger and yearning to learn and to get it right, that was just something that was in front of me, and I was like, I'm not a quitter. I'm not a quitter. I'm not a quitter. I'm going to learn this, and I did. But in the meantime, here we go. There's my square. Okay, so what's wrong with this granny blanket? Well, the first thing that's wrong with it is essentially the granny square that I started out with. It's there's some issues with it. Now that beautiful, beautiful flower there, that beautiful daisy, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just the subsequent rows after it. It's the granny square that I tried to create behind the daisy. That's the problem, and what becomes the eventual problem of the entire project. And I want to show you the second one before I continue to give you my notes. Okay, here's the second one. Okay, now let's see. Can you tell what's wrong with this granny square blanket? Let's look. So what do you think is wrong with it? Turn it around so you get a better look. Alright, so this started out well. The granny square that I used, that I began, which is right here in the middle, that is correct. That was correct. But it's what I did afterwards, which is incorrect. And for that, error, it set the stage for all of this. Now you may say, how? Well, there are two things wrong with this blanket. The first one is the fact that the first square is correct and the pink, I'm trying to think, the first 4 rows of this afghan is correct. It is a square and the clusters are uniformed and they are correct. Now what happens next is the fact, and it's the same error that I will make in the next afghan, is that instead of me making my granny clusters, well, I see right now that I still screwed up right here. So I am incorrect. Instead of me making my granny clusters underneath the stitch, instead I went into the stitch. Can you see that? I went into the stitch, and this is what created the wonkiness and the misshapen look of this afghan. That's a huge error. And what happened is, because if you can see it right here, I made the cluster inside of the stitch. And what happens is that upon each succession of rows, the stitches and the clusters pull onto each other, which creates these huge spaces in my work. And on top of that, it helped to create this misshapen, wonky look. So as I continued crocheting, I was trying to figure out where I went wrong and how to fix it. But the conclusion that I came to at the time was that maybe I was off on the math. Because remember, in another video I said granny squares is about math. If you get your math right, you'll get the granny square right. Correct? Correct. Well, I had the math correct. I had the stitches correct. But what was I doing wrong? Well, the first thing that I was doing wrong was I was creating granny clusters inside of the stitch, which pulled on the stitch and helped to give my overall afghan a misshapen look. The second thing that I was doing incorrectly was the fact that I did not turn my work. So the lack of turning my work caused my square to become a little wonky. The same with this one. You could probably see it better in this one as well. I created my granny clusters, and look at this one, inside of the stitch. But the granny cluster is supposed to go into the space up underneath the stitch. For example, here's a granny square that I've been working on. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Here it is. Now notice where my granny square clusters are going. They're going into the space or underneath the stitch, not through the stitch like this. And that's where I made my biggest error. My second error was the fact that I did not turn my work. Turning your work while creating a granny square afghan is so important because it keeps your granny square a square. So you can either turn your work on every row, or like I do, I turn my work every second row. So now I have a granny square that is symmetrical all the way around. And that's what you want. Now, I keep these two granny squares because I keep them around because I made them. A lot of hard work and a lot of love went into them. And yes, they are kind of wonky and irregular, but they are some of my, I feel, they're still some of my greatest, part of my greatest hits collection. And I mean, they're my babies. I gave birth to them. And yes, there's some things wrong with them, but guess what? They're still cute. I still keep them here in the tiny studio. I keep them on my recliner here. And I just love to look at them because it symbolizes to me, it symbolizes the fact that I was willing to try and continue until I got it right. These two granny square afghans are a symbol of the fact that you have to remain consistent, and you have to have a perseverance type of attitude, and you have to be open to learn. You have to be open to the fact that you're not going to always get it right. As a crocheter, you're not going to always get it right, and guess what? That's okay. We're all in the area of learning. The thing is don't give up. Don't give up, because if you give up, you're not going to get to this point. You can't give up. You have to keep on going, and don't be so quick to throw out your work. Don't be so quick to sometimes frog everything. And I say that because I use these two lap blankets. I use them in the winter when it's a little chilly on my legs. And yes, they are wonky. So what? It's just for me. And it's a reminder of where I came from. It's a reminder of where I started. It's a lesson in everything. Now, the other granny afghans that I made, I was able to frog them and do other things with the yarn. But these two I kept because I don't mind. And they are an inspiration. They are an inspiration to me. Both of them. Both of these beauties are an inspiration to me, and they let me know that anything that I put my mind to, I can accomplish. And sometimes being an artist, other people, the thing is, you're not being an artist, or you're not an artist according to the definition of other people. What happens in this tiny studio, what goes on here is a method of my own mind, a method of my own journey as an artist. And yes, I screw up sometimes, but guess what? So what? We all screw up. We all make mistakes. And these two babies, they are a little wonky, and a little weird, but so what? So am I. Thank you for hanging out with me today in the tiny studio, and give me your thoughts about my wonky granny square Afghan journey. And I'm sure you have some things in your tiny studio that might not be perfect, but they are perfect for you. Share your comments with me and your thoughts. And I will see you next time on Let's Crochet and Chat. Bye bye.